We're live.
We're live.
What's up? What's up? My name is Gus.
I'm Chris. Sorry.
And this is the Anomaly Podcast. Figured he could introduce himself. He's a big boy.
Hi. Thanks. Zoned out.
So there's a lot that's been going on, and we're trying to figure out what to talk about. And honestly, the thing that's on everybody's mind right now is all of the shit going down in California.
Yeah.
So it's interesting the way that that whole thing is being framed. If you're living under a rock, LA basically started having some protests regarding immigration.
Yeah. ICE involvement.
ICE involvement and stuff like that. And that turned into, within just a few days, turned into a sort of national situation where right now the National Guard, which has now been federalized, is there.
Military
and then there's
Marines are coming in.
Yeah, the Marines are also coming in as well. So what are you seeing with this? I mean, basically, what are you, based on what you're seeing on the news and what you looked up and how does this all look like for you?
I mean, I think that there's two different issues or two different things, right? There's the protesting and stuff that's happening because of the immigration. I don't know. I don't think it's the immigration policy, right? Because it's like 52 or 54% of Americans approve of the immigration policies. I think it's the execution and how these policies are being implemented from an immigration standpoint.
We're on a podcast. Can I call you back?
I just want to say hello.
All right, cool.
Love you guys.
Yeah. That was our OP.
We
Rich.
should put a hat on the door.
That's true.
What's happening in here?
Maybe not a hat. Maybe like a do not disturb or something.
Yeah, we do something that's pretty obvious on air.
Yeah. I mean, high level, I think that it's like, so you've got the protests and people who are protesting, and then you've got the National Guard that's been federalized, that's come in, depending, I guess, on where you're reading or what you're hearing, depends on the reason why it happened. And the high level, the issue that I'm hearing, and that just on some of the research that I've done, is that, Trump nationalized or federalized the National Guard and brought them in even when the governor of the state said that they didn't need them.
Yeah.
And they sent him in. And the argument around that is that, that's a problem, because you need, based on the act or the reasoning as to why.
You trying to figure out, like, constitutionally, is there?
So I don't know if it's constitutionally. I just think it's legislatively, and I could be wrong, but there's like three reasons how I guess a sitting president could nationalize or federalize the National Guard, and it has to be either because federal laws and stuff are being broken, or they can't handle or manage the situation, and or there's like a national security issue or something.
Well,
there's like three.
Yeah,
and I probably butchered those. I can't remember the three.
The reason that the administration gave is that ICE agents are federal agents.
Mm-hmm.
So federal agents were hurt during it wasn't a raid. But it was an operation that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
They were hurt during an operation, and it wasn't until then that the National Guard was then federalized. So they're using, because one of the rules, and again, I don't know I'm not sure exactly what the rule states, but it basically says that if a federal agents or federal property is effectively at risk, then the president has the authority to federalize the National Guard for the purpose of protecting,
mm-hmm.
like that scenario.
Sure.
Right. So that's the rationale the administration is using to have federalized the National Guard. And right now, at least as far as I can tell, there's not anything that shows the National Guard doing anything outside the bounds, because they're limited in what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not permissible for them to do anything that's related to like police work. So they can't like enforce laws. They can't do anything like they can't take anyone into custody or anything like that. Like they're not permitted to do any of that stuff. So right now they're basically stationed to protect the federal buildings, and then they are doing some. This is where I think the governor Newsom is kind of making a case, which he may have one. They are acting as a protective force around ICE for ICE to do
their work. Yeah,
and
like bodyguards.
Yeah, so they are protecting like the perimeter of whatever operation's happening. So Governor Newsom is, I think, making an argument that, well, that is a gray area and that kind of bleeds into enforcement of local laws. Right? So, that would be an overstep according to what Governor Newsom and his administration is essentially arguing. So that would be interesting to see how that plays out in court, because if federal agents were effectively injured, and that's the reason why they made the call to bring in the National Guard, and National Guard is primarily focused on just protecting federal buildings and not really doing anything else. Could it be said that them playing a perimeter protection role around ICE operations, could that be skewing the line? That's tough. I mean, that would be a tough call. They are in California, so it would require probably a very liberal judge to lean on the side of Governor Newsom, because right now it seems like they're like on the edge of what they're permitted to do, but they haven't done anything that's outside, at least as far as I can tell, nothing documented that's outside of what they're permitted to do.
So when I think of this, like, and I try and cut through the noise, right? And like, I think to your point, they're not doing anything that they're not permitted to do. I think it's like I don't know. I feel like it's very politicized.
It's
right.
Absolutely
I don't
politicized.
think.
Yeah.
Do I think that it's necessary? Do I think that was necessary for them to federalize the National Guard for this reasoning at this time? I don't think so. I don't think that they gave, one, to my understanding, they didn't give the governor a heads up that they were bringing him in.
Mm-hmm.
And two, from my understanding, there's only been like 50 arrests, which clearly are from local officers.
No, it's been more than that.
It's more than that.
Yeah,
now?
it's like probably like 250 now.
Okay, so and it's even within, from my understanding, like a few block radius. It's not like the whole city.
And that's all the police doing that.
Yeah, that's all the police doing that. So the thing is like, okay, so you've brought the National Guard in, federalized them into a state that didn't ask for it, for the reasoning that you're protecting federal workers, and you didn't give the local law enforcement, who clearly is doing what they're supposed to be doing, didn't give them the opportunity to handle the situation.
That's fair.
And where I think the slippery slope is, so that's the reason why I think that he did this from a political standpoint. He throws coal into the fire all the time. But I think that the problem is just like, we've, up until now, we've been a nation where it's like, you don't want the military. Like I remember going, it was like in like 2011, or it was probably in like 2011. I went to Puerto Rico, and I don't know if it was their military or not, but I remember going into Puerto Rico, into New San Juan, and like the police there had like AR-15s.
Oh yeah, and in military
gear. And there's just like, they could be the best people, right? But there's just like this nuanced feeling of that happening. And I think that our nation has just been very much against having that on the streets. And I think that that's the big concern now, is that, and then if he did it here, he can do it in another. And he had made a Donald Trump had made a comment, maybe it was back in like 2016 or something, when he was talking about the question was around like federalizing or militarizing the National Guard, and he had made mention that there's no reason to do that. He wouldn't do that unless there was like an insurrection happening, and then but like this, he has failed to go so far as to say that this is an insurrection.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, and I was talking with somebody over the weekend about some other issues with other politics, and they're just like, yeah, but I was making a mention of how somebody's doing something right now, and they're like, yeah, but that just happens all the time. Like I was making mention about like my concern with, and I'm not trying to get off the path, but just kind of I'll circle it back. Like my concern with, like, we were talking about like the 2020, was it 2026? When is the next election? 2020, 2029, 2028?
We just had
it this year,
yeah,
right? 2028.
Yeah.
I was like, I think that I had mentioned, I think Newsom is going to make a bid for the running for president on the Democratic Party. And I was like, and I'm pretty sure that Vance is going to be somebody's running on the right side. I was like, my problem with Vance is that, he just had just these staunch moral objections to Trump as a person and everything, like back in 2016. And now he's just all
Trump fan.
And then the people are talking to me, it's like, yeah, but that's politics. That happens all the time. That happened with Kennedy, that happened with Hillary and Obama and stuff. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, well, first of all, I don't recall them attacking somebody's moral character. They may have had major disagreements on policies, and I could be wrong, but my thing is like, but you're using that as a reason as to why it's okay for them to do that now. And I think we've had a discussion about like, whenever it benefits, we lean on the fact that the other side did it before,
right,
in order to justify it happening now,
instead of just whataboutism.
Instead of it just being, and I see that kind of being a situation like here. It's like, he said one thing and now he's going back. Now he's doing something completely not completely counter, but just against what he said he would or wouldn't do before. And I think it's just driven by political agenda. And like the American people, here we are arguing about a situation instead of debating or having dialogue around the issue around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that it's definitely been politicized because, to your point, there wasn't enough time for, and I'm not a fan of Governor Newsom, but there wasn't enough time for Governor Newsom to have a reaction to what was happening with the protests. And, part of the challenge also is that, and it's hard to get clarity on like how the protests escalated, because the protests, it's my understanding that the protests were precipitated on this idea that ICE was doing these raids on like Home Depots.
Yeah, and they were just picking up illegals as opposed to focusing on the hardened criminals. Correct. That the policy and administration continues
to all of that has been found to be misinformation. So all of that was just sort of like social media and like hyperbole, and none of that was actually real. There were no raids on Home Depots or anything like that. The sheriff's office, actually, the lady who handles the sheriff's office there, had to actually make a news, like she actually had to make a news conference to tell the news, like, hey, all of this like talk about raids that that's happening, that none of that is true, none of that's real. So there's also a part of the challenge I think we're running into is that there's a lot of like not real information that's coming out that people are just blindly trusting without verifying like its validity. And then they're turning that into, that's where a lot of the protests, a lot of the angst for the protests came from, this idea. And I'm not saying it's not worthy of protesting, right? But the angst in of where this particular protest came from was from a story that wasn't even real. There's enough real stuff to protest about.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but like this whole, a lot of this came from sort of a fury of a story that just, was a facade. And then the question becomes, well, did that fury turn into the violence against ICE that then brought Trump, had the Trump administration call in the National Guard? Possibly. And so there are a couple different factors that are problematic, because it's a good idea for the American population to be able to vocalize their concerns about issues, which is what protests are about. That's what the First Amendment is about. I'm totally down for that. It's just it's hard to when they're protesting based on something that's not real, even if the issue is real, like they're angry about a thing that never happened. And then now they have this whatever angst or anger, frustration that they're putting into their local area about a thing that never happened. And then that's causing all of this sort of like bubbling of frustration and, that which obviously turned into something with ICE agents. I do think that, the administration should have given California like at least a couple days to like, okay, how are you going to handle that?
Well, it was from my understanding too that they were kind of settling it down up until the National Guard and stuff came in.
So that's hard to.
That's hard to. But I'm just saying. But to your point, I think that just goes to show like premature, like chicken before the egg, right? Yeah. It's like premature in bringing these.
I would agree.
Right, premature in bringing them and them in.
There's certainly data to support that whenever you bring enforcement into a situation that doesn't necessarily require enforcement or a higher level of enforcement, that can spur on.
Sure, it creates a lot of tension.
Yeah, it creates more tension. It could cause more. But there's also an argument on the other side is that, there was violence that did happen against ICE agents, and that, not bringing in enforcement could have prevented more violence from happening at the same time. So there's not enough data to know like which direction this would have gone. So, to be fair to the president and his administration, there was violence that did happen against ICE agents, and there were people that got hurt, and the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to protect them, I don't think that's necessarily bad in and of itself. I do think that, the response should have been more measured, and Trump doesn't do measured well, right? His administration doesn't do measured well.
And it's probably from just the context that I have of the president. It's just like, here's kind of like what I feel like I feel like he was told about what was happening. ICE agents are involved. We could send in the National Guard because we have that right, or we have that ability under these measures. And again, didn't measure the warrantness of it, but saw it as an opportunity to
that's fair.
Further his political agenda of what's doing it, and then decided to do it without giving credence to, I don't want to say the social impact, but just like the tradition, not even the tradition, but just like the precedent of how we handled situations like that. Like the effect of bringing in militarizing something for domestic problems. Like, I mean, I just think that's a big deal. Like there should be a really good reason why you bring.
I would agree with that.
Military style force to the streets of.
I would agree with that.
Citizens.
Well, I mean, and I want to play devil's advocate here, because LA also has a huge history of like violent uprisings where, the city's been, trashed a few times. I mean, the latest, incidents were obviously there was the Rodney King violence that happened back in the 90s. You know, the BLM,
Black Lives Matter.
movement that they effectively had riots during that time. They called them protests, but a lot of them were very
there was a lot
reckless.
of destruction. Yeah, they were destroying small businesses, blowing up cars. Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? So like there, you know, and LA is one of those cities that you hear about having those issues. So, you know, I would agree with you that that there seems to be a political motivation here. But I mean, LA does have a history of those kinds of having those kinds of challenges.
So let me ask you, I'm just kind of curious in your thought, and I don't have really a position on this, but I've heard too, is like, I think that Trump actually said this in one of his news conferences or whatever, after, was that there's like pretty much like hired workers who are out there causing these issues, like protest, like instigators and stuff in the situation. But then my question is like, you know, for purposes, he's saying that they're hiring these instigators in order to create this issue, but it's like, but why wouldn't that have been true, like for the Black Lives Matter movement or like the Rodney King? Like, it just seems like there's instigators present, just like there was instigators present at the January 6th thing, because it seems to fit that direction of the narrative. But it's like on the other ones, there's no instigators. I just feel like, am I saying makes sense? Do you understand what?
Well, I mean, the local police department, even in this case, they did specify that there are in at least for LA, that there are people that come out, and it doesn't matter what the cause is. They're anarchists, and they
just want to create havoc.
Yeah, and a lot of the police officers even know them by face, like they recognize them. Oh yeah, that's John, right?
John the anarchist.
You know, John's at it again.
Don't let him near a car.
Yeah. You know, they're already kind of familiar with some of them, even, you know what I mean? So they do exist. The question is, are they, you know, I guess the question is there a conspiracy to like pay them to do some of this stuff?
Yeah.
That I don't know. I mean, you know, it's hard to say, because for January 6th, there's definitely evidence of federal officers, like federal agents being in the crowd. So that was pretty, like that's been shown as true. The question is whether or not those federal agents were they working on behalf of the federal government, or were they vocalizing their own thoughts, which that's a tough one, because, you know, federal agents are usually, if you've ever met a federal agent, they are very careful about what they do, what they don't do, because they know that, you know, if they step out of line, they will be released from duty, and they lose all of their like pension and all of the, and you know, all of the things all the benefits you get from being a federal agent. And there's a lot of benefits that you get for being a federal agent. So there's a lot of risk for them and their families to go and like get involved in protests. So for them to be there, I would be surprised if that was because they just wanted to show in solidarity, you know, their beliefs in whatever, in Trump or whatever the case.
Well, I would play devil's advocate, and I don't know one way or the other. I'd play devil's advocate and say that, like, well, the amount of federal agents that were supposedly there, and I don't know what that number is, like, what percentage or fraction of that was that from like the total federal agent population, right? Because I mean, the herd mentality is real. Right.
No, I believe,
you know
that.
What I mean. I'm just saying, like, and I don't know which one was it, but like, I would also say that, like, I feel like the herd mentality is strong to where, you know, even if it might go against their own individual like interests, like if they see, like,
that's tough, man.
I mean,
if you've ever met if you've ever met a federal agent, let me tell you something. Federal agents are like, they are very like. They're very by the book.
I hear you, but I mean, if I would say, you know, if somebody is willing to go to war for their country and put their own self-interest below the self-interest of the country
Mhm.
and go off to war, I would argue under that same premise that there could be people who even are federal workers who felt like by them doing this was putting their country's interest above their own interests.
That's a reasonable argument,
right? And I don't know, and that could or could not be, but I think that I think that could be plausible.
Sure.
And I don't know which one.
I don't know either.
I'm not here to make assumptions or accusations.
But the case was that there were federal agents that were seen at that
in the
crowd and whatnot. Yeah. So it's a question of whether or not they were actually participants as part of the federal government, or if they were just self-engaged.
Well, January 6th, was it? Did Congress say that they didn't need the National Guard on January
What do you mean?
Because the National Guard wasn't
called. Yeah, by anybody. Like all of Congress has the ability to at least request something.
So I just think it's interesting that those whole events played out, and the National Guard wasn't there, but there was
Capitol Police showed up.
Capitol Police. That's federal, right? Is Capitol Police federal, or is that state? Is that state? Is that DC?
It's DC Police.
DC Police. So it's not federal.
I mean,
agents.
I don't know how they fit because DC is like a unique.
It's not a state. It's like a
federal entity.
Yeah.
So maybe Capitol Police are federal. That's possible.
So I don't know if so whether
they're the local Washington DC Police Department,
which is a federal area.
Right. That's why I don't know. That's a gray area.
Yeah.
I don't.
I just find it very interesting that, under the premise as to why Trump decided to call in or militarize the.
For that, and then not for January 6th?
Not for January 6th. To me, I mean, we can argue the semantics of that, but that just I don't even care that he did or didn't. I just think that if you take that information and then look at how he operates when he operates, and this is just for anybody, I think we take a step back and do it.
I don't think he had authority for January 6th. He would have already been outside of the presidency by that time.
No, he hadn't been sworn in. They didn't confirm him. They were there to confirm the votes. And I don't think that they confirm
when does the inauguration happen? That's why he was there. He was there to he was essentially there saying that the election was stolen from him.
But I don't think Biden
he wasn't in office yet.
So I don't know. I have to do the timing because I'm pretty sure that per the Constitution,
he's still president up until
noon on January 6th. I think that's what it is.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what happens.
Okay.
I think they go the certification of the votes, I think, is more of a formality of Congress.
But that still means that.
But via the Constitution, I think the Constitution still states that
until that confirmation happens.
It's not even that confirmation. It's that at noon on January 6th, the office of the presidency transfers.
I see.
I think. I don't like going on the internet while we're having this, but I feel like I want to have clarity.
Yeah.
On that.
So that's a good question. Why is he so fast to pull the trigger on LA, but he wasn't so fast to pull the trigger on January 6th for that same purpose? I mean, defenders of Trump would probably say there wasn't an experience that he had prior to January 6th to know to do that, and now that he had that experience, he's faster on the draw.
There's the BLM movement.
He didn't call a National Guard for them, though, did he?
No, but that's what I'm saying. But he had that experience seeing what happened. Right, and there was a lot of rioters and destruction of property there, and regardless of whether or not you want to argue it was criminal or not.
Was the federalization of the National Guard in place by that time? Because that's
the ability to federalize the National Guard.
Because that happened during his first presidency.
The ability.
Because before then, I don't think it was so easy to do that.
Federalize.
because I remember that being sort of a big issue for a lot of people. Like, that the president shouldn't have the ability to take control of the National
It says
Guard.
it dates back to the early 20th century.
Oh, why do I feel like there was
Key milestone in federalizing the National Guard, the Militia Act of 1903, the Dick Act is what it's called.
probably Richard something?
Yeah, Richard. And then we said, let's see, was
there any updates to it or something? I feel like there was some kind of new thing that was added to that.
Let me ask.
Made it easier for him to federalize.
Was there any updates to that recently?
So, but anyways, I guess going back to, that's a good question though. Like, he pulled the trigger really fast on this one, which helps to, I think, really, to your point, solidified the idea that this was a political move more than it was a, I need to protect the interests of California.
Yeah, personally, I think that's secondary.
Yeah.
If that was even secondary.
Yeah. So the interest of the federal buildings and the federal agents that were in there. So that's interesting. Yeah, I can, that is a reasonable position to take, considering his history not having federalized the which he totally could have done during BLM, and that he would have been justified to do it during BLM. But I guess that would have been also
it's not so January 6th was when the
event happened.
But no, it's when Congress affirms the votes. It's January 20th.
Okay.
At noon is when
so he was still president.
He was still president.
Through
the 20th. He had the authority. The authority to do that. I knew it was noon on one. I knew it was noon on a day.
I didn't know what day.
Didn't know what day.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Okay. I mean, I could understand him not doing it. I guess I could understand him not doing it during BLM because of just the general sort of potential racial implications that could happen there. Because there was a lot of racial tension. That whole movement was based on racial tension, and if calling the National Guard in during.
But I feel like this immigration issue still has its own racial tension.
It's just different, I think.
I mean, I get what you're saying, that it's not because this one is racial because it's not a specific group. It's like a whole bunch of different countries, but like the BLM was specific to Black people.
Right.
I'm going to say it. Hopefully.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah,
right. It was specific to that individual group, but then you could, I could say, okay, but that was the name of it. I mean, there's so many different. There's so many different Black people from so many different.
Correct.
World,
yeah,
right?
And that's a whole other
Paris
conversation.
You got Africa, you got Jamaica, you got they're all over the place. So it's like, and then.
I mean, I think that movement was very much geared towards like Black Americans.
Yes.
So
I would agree.
I think that's the would be the fairest interpretation of what that was. Yeah.
I would agree.
But I mean, this one's different because there is an element where there's a real problem, right? Where the problem is that we have an immigration issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real problem.
It's a problem, yeah.
Right? It's not like it's not a problem. That's why 50% of the country is like on board with a lot of the immigration policy, because that 50% of the country, and that's the 50% that's sane, right? It could be more, it could be less. I would argue that there may be even more people that agree that the idea of immigration, of like people coming in illegally, is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like most people would not be my wife hates that I use this analogy, but most people would not be okay with someone just coming into your house without permission.
Yeah.
That would be reasonable to say that most people would be like, I am not comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, for us, our house is the United States, and people coming in illegally is like them breaking into our home, right?
Yeah.
To some degree. So, I think that most people would be averse to that idea.
Yeah.
So to say 50% of the population is in agreement with the Trump policy, I mean, I think they're maybe in agreement with some of the things that he's put in, but I think the majority of people are agree that we need to have a better way of getting people into the country, because that's part of the problem, right? Because the reason why people are like
coming in illegally is because they can't get in here legally, efficiently.
Efficiently, it's too hard, right? So like there is definitely some challenges there, and the argument on the left is that, well, they're just trying to make their lives better because they're leaving whatever challenges from the other country that they're leaving from, or whatever the case may be, which is, hey, listen, we want to be able to be empathetic to that.
Yeah.
But they still got to get in a way that's like legal.
I mean, I think that, so it's like, I mean, to your point, like even when we had immigrants coming into the States, they all came through Ellis Island.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And like they were documented
and everything. And I think that, like, to your point, like the 52 or 54%, I just heard the statistic and I can't remember. And it was just one statistic and that could change, of people being on board with there being a problem with immigration. And to your point that you think that it could even be higher.
I think it has to be higher.
I would argue, I wouldn't argue. I would just point out that I think I would say yes, I think that it would be higher. And I think the reason why we're seeing it where it is because this issue has been painted with such a broad stroke.
Correct.
Right? So whenever you hear immigration, you can ask somebody about immigration, and the majority of people are like, so what's the first thing that comes to mind when you come to immigration? Oh, you're talking about deporting people and getting people out, right?
Right.
And I think that's where the problem is, or the concern and the issue is that we're, for good, bad, or indifferent, the United States, regardless of whatever political party you want to blame it on, has set a precedent of how we handle or don't handle illegal immigrants over the course of decades, right? So I think that there definitely needs to be immigration reform. I don't think anybody is going to argue about the immigration reform. I think that the challenge or the upset, really, at least the concern that I have or see, is that you could have somebody, unless they have criminal backgrounds and all of it, criminal issues, which there's another topic, they're deporting them, but they're deporting them without due process. And I think that that's an issue. Like, we could argue that due process is too long or it takes too much time. And I would go back and argue, but they're entitled to due process. Like,
well, I don't
think
think
just make people disappear.
I don't know that. So that's something that I'm not clear on, because so let's say let's say you're an illegal immigrant and you're crossing the Mexico-Texas border.
Yeah.
And ICE catches you. Right? While you're crossing.
Yeah.
They don't have to put you through due process to deport you.
No. And so I think that's where the nuance is where, like, to my point is like, if you've been here for 10, 15 or 20 years, right? You're an illegal immigrant. I feel that there's a precedent that has been set, like, from the standpoint that, and there's no legality to it, right? I think it's just kind of like understanding the fact, like, hey, if you came here illegally 10 or 15 years ago, you were trying to escape whatever it was, or just make a better life for your family, right? And you hadn't gained citizenship for whatever the reason is, but you've been here for 10, 15, 20 years. You've made a life. You're a good citizen. And then you just get scooped up today because you're an illegal immigrant. And the argument is you don't have due process because of that. Yes, maybe because you're an illegal immigrant, you don't have due process. Because if you'd have gotten picked up at the time of crossing, you would have been sent back.
Yeah.
And I would argue that while that's the case, the precedent in which the United States has allowed illegal immigrants up into this point into the country, and who have created some type of economic benefit to it, who arguably may or may not be criminals, I do feel that they should have due process before they get sent out. Like, I don't. That's a gray, I guess.
So I don't necessarily agree with that. What I would agree with is I do feel like if you've been in the country, like not quite amnesty, but like I do believe in
a process,
a path to residency at least, right? So maybe not a path to citizenship, but a path to residency, so that you can remove your illegal status. Like, I don't have a problem with that, right? Where we can say, okay, we got these millions of people that are illegal in the United States, and we need to solve that problem because we can't just have a bunch of illegal people in the United States, right? We need to make them legal. We figure out a way to make them legal, especially if they're producing, and providing value to the community. Let's make them legal. That way, they also get the legal rights afforded to being a legal resident. They don't have to, they can get IDs, they can get social security cards so that they can pay into the system and then be entitled to, social security benefits and all the things that you can get as, being as part of the American system.
But you don't have to be a resident or a citizen of the country to be entitled to those rights.
Yes, you do.
No, because if I were a resident of Europe and I came over here and I was accused of committing a crime, you can't just charge me for that crime without due process. I still am entitled to due process.
But you came here legally.
Okay. So we're talking specifically just about the legality of the act of coming into the
that's a problem. That itself is what's causing the issue.
So would we agree that? Or would we agree, or would you have a different perspective that, if somebody were here for 15, 20 years illegally, that the more appropriate course of action would be to determine whether or not they are criminals, right? And if they're criminals, then we talk about deporting them, but it shouldn't be you're illegal and we're going to deport you. It's like, okay, we need to work on that amnesty or that residency,
whatever that is.
I
don't know. Look, this is the way my opinion of it is this: if we have a system that provides people who've come here illegally a way to at least get residency, because I think that you don't have to give them citizenship. I don't think that is and they can decide once they get residency if they want to get citizenship after that, right? But at least give them residency. So that way they have some kind of legal status in the United States. We know who they are. We know that they're not criminal. They are participating in our economic system in some capacity. We can see that they're contributing.
Do you know because I don't know. Do you know the nuanced difference between what residency status is versus like citizen status is?
Like, so residents don't get the opportunity. They don't have the right to vote.
Oh, they don't have those. Oh,
there's a number of like rights that you don't get as a resident.
As a citizen.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But you get legal status here, right? You have the right to work, right? You get benefits, right? You will go due process. You're permitted due process, all that stuff. Like all of those things that are most important are there, so that you can't just be picked up and sent out, right? That wouldn't be a thing. You can't do that to a resident.
So I'm just going to play it. No, I just want to kind of play. I'm just trying to set up a situation. I just want to see, because I'm always just like wanting to see how things would play out. And if I were an illegal immigrant, I don't have right to due process. I should be deported, right?
That's the way the law is right now.
Right. Okay. So, but if I were an illegal immigrant and then I committed a crime in the United States, the correct course of action would just for me to be deported, because you can't. How can you charge somebody criminally domestically for something they did if they also don't get due process rights?
Well, okay.
Do you understand?
But okay. So you're talking about one thing is a right, and one thing is like a right that every citizen has versus like them doing yet another criminal act. So they broke into the country and then they did another criminal act.
Yeah.
So like if someone came in from Europe and they came in legally and they did a crime, they would be prosecuted for the crime. For the crime that they did. So like everyone is going to get prosecuted for the crime that they do in our country. So like, I'm not sure what you're saying, if the good or the, like, I'm not understanding. I don't know if they're parallel. I don't know if they're parallel. You're saying because they don't have the right to due process, then they should also not be prosecuted for crimes in the United States?
It's not that just to be clear, I think that they should be prosecuted if you commit a crime.
Yeah, make sure you get it because it's being recorded right now.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting far leftism over here. You commit a crime in the United States, I think that you should be held accountable for that. I'm just trying to understand, like, yeah, I mean, I guess.
I mean, here's the.
I guess it's like, as I'm saying it in my head, I can conceive.
This is the biggest problem with what's happening with immigration, right? Americans are very empathetic, right? And this is one of those scenarios where, like, we really want to help, and
I agree.
It's painful for most people to see people that are trying to escape whatever they're dealing with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're like worried for their lives. It's a shitty life or whatever.
Yeah,
and they're trying to
make
find
a
better life for themselves and for their children, and we want to empathize for that, right? And this is where, like, a lot of the bleeding heart liberal idea comes from, right? Where that's what that is. That's like the liberal who really wants to help and wants to really, like, do good by this person. Oh, I see you're in pain. Let me come here. Let's help. Yeah, we can help you. We have the ability to help you.
Bring us your weak, your weary.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think there's one other.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. So, I mean, so that is being, like, wrapped in, that emotion is being wrapped into the logistical problem of, we just have people that are coming into the country. We don't know who the hell they are.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And from a security perspective, because, like, one of the arguments are, oh, well, only, there's such a small percentage of people that are coming in that are criminals. But, like, if you look back to, like, I think last year that Biden was president, I think there were, like, I don't know, they were saying something along the lines of, like, 5 to 7 million illegal immigrants came into the country, which is a load of people
during his presidency.
Yeah. So of those, there were like 17,000, I think, people that were caught and arrested for criminal acts. That were illegals from the 5 million, or 7 million, or whatever it was, right? So they're like 17. So from a percentage perspective, that's tiny.
Yeah. So was it like 85? Was it like 8,500 per state?
I'm sorry.
You said like 17,000.
There's 17,000 illegals that were caught.
There's like 50 states.
But I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying I would argue that's a big. I mean, it's like 8,500 per state.
It's a tiny number, right? It's a really tiny number, but it's still 17,000 criminal.
Well, I think that's what I think you bring up a great point, because, like, the same people who, like, you argue that, and it's like, yes, it's a small percentage, but we're talking about the nominal number, right? Like, the nominal number is still a big number, still really high, which I think is interesting, because, I mean, we're not going to get back on the taxes or anything, but the argument on taxing more is that the rich have so much, and if we tax them at a smaller rate or whatever, that nominal number is so big. Right. But that's tax conversation. Yeah. But I don't want to go back there, because we were talking about that last week. But yes, I mean,
but it's still 17,000
people. It's a number.
Yeah.
It's a big number.
It's a big enough number that you're like, I don't want 17,000 criminals coming in, and those are the people that got caught. Mm-hmm. What about the ones that didn't get caught? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about security, like, security is not about, like, making sure that everyone who comes through the door is like, oh, you're worried that everyone coming through the door is a criminal, right? You're worried about that tiny percentage.
Yeah. Well, and I'll go back to the, I think I said this a while ago. Maybe it was, I don't remember if it was like Biden or Trump, but I've always been, because immigration has been an issue for a while.
Oh, for sure.
Right. It was an immigration under Obama too. Like, it was a topic.
It's constantly been, it's always been an issue.
I've always held the position, like, everybody's talking about immigration and the illegals coming in. We need to get them out. And I'm just sitting here. I'm like, why don't you talk about how you're going to make the pathway to citizenship, to residency, to allow people, because you can't keep people from wanting to come.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? But what you can do is you can make the process easier and more, because I would argue, how many did you say? How many illegal immigrants? 5 million?
I think in
or whatever
during Biden, I think it was like between 5 and 7, something like that. It was
So let's say
it was a big number.
5 or 7 million. I don't think that we can't sustain 5 million people.
Oh yeah, we
coming
certainly
in.
we can.
It's just the problem is sustaining these people who aren't citizens.
That's a problem.
That's the problem. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so then, in my opinion, the solution is fixing the immigration system, fixing the way that people can come in, how they can get processed, right? Whatever that is, so that they can become citizens, or maybe you don't officially become citizens. Maybe it's the path to.
I think residency is the.
You become a resident.
On that
yeah,
too.
and then maybe residency is like 5 to 10 years, and that's kind of like your, I don't want to call it a probationary period, right? But like
it's just
it's that step
whatever the
to,
rules
it's that
are.
step to citizenship. But like that way, you're here legally. You're contributing to the tax base. You're getting the benefits of protection of the legal system. You're getting like all of this stuff, and then you're kind of shutting up the people who have all these problems with illegal immigrants. Which I don't want to say shut them up, because they've got a valid point.
Sure.
Right. But everybody's, I don't know, I feel like the topic, it's just always been about getting the illegals out instead of focusing on how do we allow.
I mean, there's been talk about that. There's been talk
This
about
legislation
like
just doesn't go
amnesty and like path to citizenship. I don't know that path to citizenship is the right call. I think path to like residency would be more reasonable.
I think so.
You know what I'm saying? And then and that path, I mean, there's also ways that you can do where we can help Mexico, for example, right? Where you can say to people, well, what if we offer the opportunity for like work visas in the United States? So if they live in Mexico, they can come over here and work to make money.
Excuse me.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they can go back and live in Mexico. You know what I mean? And they're just like, they're here, they may come for a month or two or for a season, and then they go back to Mexico.
Yeah, like seasonal work.
Yeah, something like that, right? Where there's an opportunity. And if you do that, then maybe maybe that's part of the process, and then that helps to supplement our workforce, which right now our concern for our workforce is we're getting into a position right now that the United States is that we have a population challenge. And that's our baby boomers are about to all retire, right? And then we're not going to have enough of a workforce to handle all of the different services that are ultimately needed, right? That's part of the challenge. And then, well, there's a couple different challenges, because that's part of the challenge. And then there's the automation issue that potentially could take up work, and AI issues that can take up jobs and stuff like that. But that's not gonna take up like a lot of the the tomato
the
farming
tomato picking,
and
stuff like that.
We don't have that yet, right? So I mean, maybe they'll develop something, but we don't have that yet. So I just feel like there are all these tools that we have that we can utilize, but for one reason or another, they're not being emphasized. And I think that there is a reasonable case to be made that a lot of the industries that use illegal immigrants are probably some of the largest lobbyists against immigration reform, because they want to be able to.
Because then they can pay them under the table.
Correct.
They can pay them low wages.
Correct.
They can pay. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It benefits them.
Their profits.
Yeah.
It's cheap labor.
It's cheap labor.
It's like slave labor.
Exactly.
Slave labor.
So they could be like, "Oh, I'm going to pay you $10 a day, right? And you'll like it. Otherwise, I'll call ice on you, right? Right.
Sorry.
That's a terrible.
Can we edit?
So
that's not humorous.
So you had asked about the difference between citizen and residency. So it looks here, like it says here. So basically, you have full legal status as a full member of the nation,
as a resident,
as a citizen.
As a citizen.
Residency is permission to live in a country without being a citizen, right? So a citizen has the right to vote, hold passports, run for office, receive full protection under the law. Residency can live and work, depending on type, but with limited political rights. So we'd have to get clarity on what the limited political rights are. Citizens may include taxes, military service, jury duty, right? And then residency often subject to taxes and visa residency compliance rules. Citizens usually are permanent unless renounced or revoked. And then residency can be temporary or permanent, often depends on conditions. A citizen can vote and run for office. Resident usually is not able to run for office or very limited. Maybe they can do elections in some countries. A citizen can have a passport, birth certificate, naturalization certificate. Residency usually has a residency permit, green card, or some kind of a visa. And then how they obtain that: a citizen is birth, descent, naturalization. Residency is usually some kind of work study, asylum, family sponsorship, or investment. And then law status for citizens is very rare. Requires some kind of legal grounds to lose citizenship. For residents, it's easier to lose. They can expire. They can violate their status, stuff like that. So those are sort of the main differences between citizenship and residency.
Can a resident be drafted?
So can a resident be
I'm going to say, I want to say it's no.
In the United States? Yeah, I'm going to say no too. Oh, can be required to register. Yeah, they can be.
Okay. So I was going to say, because I kind of feel like
U.S. residents, regardless of citizenship status, can be required to register for select service system, which is the first step towards a military draft if one were ever enacted.
Interesting. Because I was going to say, too, I was going to bring that, like, to your point, like if residency was the first step, or maybe the longer, more permanent step to legal status for immigrants coming in, that would just be the next, if they weren't eligible to be drafted, I feel like that would have been like the next topic of
to see if we can make them eligible.
Yeah, because then if you're going to start bringing in all of these people into the country who are going to be able, they don't have political rights, but they have all of the other rights and protections of the country, but because of the status, you can't draft them. I see that being
problematic. I see that. Yeah. No, but it looks like you totally can. They could totally be drafted.
That's interesting.
Right. So, I mean, I feel like this immigration issue is a lot of political theater, because there's certainly, I feel like there's solutions, and we're not like the stuff that we're talking about. Like, I don't feel like I'm a political genius talking about this. I'm just a freaking guy.
Oh, they're talking about. I just think that they're willfully not talking about.
Yes,
it's what it is.
And they're talking about the edges.
It's not that the conversations aren't happening out of ignorance.
Yeah,
right.
So they're choosing not to want to solve the problem.
Yeah,
but I feel like that it's a problem that needs to be solved, both for the sake of security, but also for the sake of like we know that we don't have. Like, Americans are not having enough children to replace like our population, right? We know that that's a problem. And whenever you have a population decline, that usually leads to other larger problems, right? So if that's the case, then, why not have a little more efficient way to bring in immigrants into the country that can, provide the support that the country is going to need to fulfill the population requirement for the nation. You know what I mean? So it seems like it's a problem that needs to be addressed, not only for the sake of security, but also for the sake of access. Like, so there needs to be some security, so we ensure we know who's coming into the country. So for sure that's the case, right? So the whole idea of like stopping people at the border is important. That is definitely a concern. We need to address that. But we also need to address, like, how are we going to get immigrants to become residents and then maybe eventually become citizens if they so choose, so that they also can participate in our system, because our system it requires us to have a growing population. And right now we're not positioned for a growing population.
Do you think that the majority, and I don't know, do you think that the majority of, okay, twofold. Do you question A is: do you feel the majority of illegal immigrants who are coming in to the country are those same people who are working those low-income jobs?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, and so then my follow-up question would be: is like, do you feel that if we created a path to residency, right, for these same people, do you still feel that even though we created that path, that they still would be the people who are working those lower income jobs?
Probably.
Okay, so I see, like, and I'm just kind of forward pacing, and this is a current issue that we have now. I feel like if we did that without tackling the challenge of the cost of childcare, that would create another. I feel like it would create a bigger issue because we're trying to get more population in, right? But if we're getting more population in to support work of stuff, and they're coming in and they're doing the lower income stuff, and then they're having kids, because I would assume that we would want families to have kids to, support the population growth.
Sure.
Right. Well, what happens if we bring an entire population of people into the country who are working low income jobs and they have family, and then childcare is where it's at? I feel like that's going to create
I mean, we got to
whole situation. I mean, it's one and the other. We got to attack one or the other.
Yeah, we got to address one problem at a time. I mean, that's speculation. I have no idea how that's going to ultimately play out. I think that we have to address the one problem, which is how are we going to deal with immigration? And then once we deal with immigration, whatever new problems come from that, we then have to, because I mean, we're not going to know what the problems are going to be. Like, we're really bad at predicting the future.
Everybody
in general, that's humans are bad at that. Like, there's some things you can predict through like really clean data, but there's no clean data on stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know that there's a way for us to really predict all the problems that are going to come from that.
Sure.
So I think we need to prioritize the most critical problems, address those, and then as we address those critical problems, other issues are going to arise from the solution that we present. And then we look at, okay, what are those problems? What are the most critical issues we need to address? And then address those. And, hopefully we can address simultaneous problem, like multiple problems simultaneously. But we also need to make sure that we're putting the appropriate resources where necessary. If it comes to the point, like, this is those people that come in and become legal, now they're taxpayers, right? Hopefully. I mean, it depends on what bracket that they're in, because depending on how the tax bracket is put in, they may not end up being taxpayers, because if they don't make enough money, they may not pay into the tax system at all, right? But what are other ways that they may be contributing, right? And then figure out, like, does that spur on economic growth? Because they may not be taxpayers, but they're consumers, so they're going to buy things.
Taxes. They pay taxes in that capacity.
Yeah, they may pay sales tax. They're going to consume things, right? So, like, they're going to be a part of the
economic value adds.
Yeah. So they're going to be, adding to the economy. So, like, the local shop that sells widgets that people need, they're going to be buying those widgets, those kinds of things, right? So they're going to be contributing to the economy in some capacity. So then, is there then a necessity to say, hey, do we want to have some kind of a child care something in the governance? I mean, that's something you can address at a later time. So, I think a lot of that also depends on, like, where are we, like, economically right now. We have a debt problem, which is a whole other issue, right? And we have to figure that's another challenge that we need to figure out pretty quick, because we're quickly moving down the credit ladder internationally, right? So that means that our bonds are not as valuable as what they used to be, right? People are not wanting to, like, other countries are not wanting to buy them as quickly. The establishment of our economy is not looking as strong as it used to look, and all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of different factors that we have to sort of address simultaneously. But so whether or not, creating a program for that, we'd have to figure out how we're going to pay for that.
Yeah.
Right? So there's not yet another drag on the debt of the country. So, I mean, it's a tough problem, and I understand why there are protests that are happening in LA, and whether or not those protests were escalated by, the National Guard, or they themselves escalated those protests. I mean, it's hard to determine what that actually is. I definitely think that this is certainly a politicized move that the Trump administration did because he doesn't like, he doesn't like Newsom.
No.
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 So I do think that was a politicized move to kind of make him look like incompetent, that the federal government had to come in and solve this for him because he's incompetent. I don't like Governor Newsom either, but he should have let him be incompetent and then come in if that was, you know what I'm saying? But he wanted to kind of, I guess, move faster just in case he was able to squelch it before, So I would agree with you that there's definitely a political motive there. And, whether or not that was the right move to make, I think it was the right move to make if he would have given Governor Newsom some more time to address it, give local authorities the time to address it.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that he could have made an argument for insurrection and invoke insurrection, which he didn't. So at least he didn't do that. So I mean that's for the sake of the conservative right. I mean I think that's the only thing that's probably benefiting him. I will say that the fact that it's kind of really it's gotten a little bit fires and like that all from optics perspective does benefit the move that he made. So it does look like he made the right decision to bring in the National Guard because it escalated fast. So optically, it does appear as if this was the right call. Thank God he called him so early. Mm-hmm. So there's a real easy argument to be made there. To be fair to the left, though, it's you could easily make an argument that it escalated because of the presence of the military force that's there.
Yeah, chicken or egg.
Yeah,
chicken or the egg.
So there's definitely an argument to be made there based on historical data that we have about how enforcement has a tendency to bring escalation. So
we're talking about this, and it could have been one. And I feel like as you're saying this, the one thing that just comes to my head that wasn't present, that probably could have been if they wanted to, was communication.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they didn't communicate
with
each other. So now there's this story, and then there's that story.
Right. He just unilaterally brought him in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or, I don't know. Then I feel it's like, okay, if you asked the governor and they said no, and then unless you felt like there was just this massive national security issue or just this massive risk.
Yeah, I
don't let them burn in their own fire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because not that you want. Not that you want anything bad to happen, but there's kind of like, you got to weigh that.
Yeah.
You got to weigh that thing, right?
I don't think I don't think he should have unilaterally brought the National Guard in yet. My view of it is that he should.
I don't think it was at the point to where the president, whoever it was, that situation did not dictate a unilateral federal movement. Response.
Yes, I would agree with that.
In doing
I think what should have happened is he should have went to Governor Newsom, say, hey, do you need me to federalize the National Guard so we can make this happen? Or are you going to go ahead and call the National Guard or something and say, let them simmer in that for the next few days, or at least
make a public statement about that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we've talked to Governor Newsom. We've offered services.
He said he's got it
handled.
Right.
We're going to let him handle it, and we're here ready.
Correct.
When they make the call.
Right.
Right.
I think that would have been a better position to take. But, I think, you're right in that, he didn't do that because he wanted to make a political statement. And I think that was not, it's looking okay now, but I think once things start settling down, I think that's going to end up being, there's going to be some backlash to that. because I think Governor Newsom may be able to make a case because the president moved so quickly. I think Governor Newsom is going to be able to make a strong enough case that federalizing the National Guard was not appropriate so quickly.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Because he could make the case to the court to say, hey, listen, I was not even given an opportunity to make use of the National Guard myself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he was, so he could even make a case for that, which I think
because the National Guard is state,
correct,
right? Until
unless the president invokes
the military act, the militia act, whatever that act was.
Well, yeah. So like the only so it's supposed to be under the National Guard is supposed to be under the governor. So unless the federal government feels it's necessary for them to step in, essentially, right? So I think that there's likely to be backlash. The challenge that Trump is going to be running into, he's already obviously the whole Abrego Garcia.
Yeah,
that
whole nother thing.
That guy's come back, and now there's indictments against him, which I think is it seems to me like I was like, well, why didn't those indictments happen prior to him being deported? Like now he's back, he's being indicted for.
So to my understanding, what I think is because, so if you recall, President Trump had previously made the comments that it's out of his jurisdiction. He can't make the president of El Salvador bring him back. Right. So it's to my understanding that the letter went out to the president of El Salvador requesting that he allow him to come back because of indictments that they wanted. So I think that, again, it was a political theater to bring him back with still fitting the narrative that it's like, oh,
he was illegal. He was
we still had to ask the president because it wasn't within our control. Yeah. And the reason why we asked him was because of these things.
No, I know, but I mean, like, if they were already so this is based on I think a 2022 where in 2022 he was found with other illegals, and supposedly there was some trafficking that was suggested from that incident or whatever. And that, so I guess what's confusing to me is, before they deported him, why didn't they just indict him for that prior to the deportation?
Because I think that it just didn't fit the narrative. I feel like it was like, we're deporting illegal criminals, and we deported him.
Right.
And then the issue came up that he should not have been deported
to El Salvador. Right.
And now he was. And then they pigeoned themselves into a hole where, well, he's out of our jurisdiction. Like, we can't make them do anything.
Right.
And now with the pressure of him being deported where he shouldn't have been, this is kind of a reason that they can request him to come back.
Right. So they
save face,
indict him,
and now move him through this. That's my speculation.
Yeah. So
again, I think it's theater.
Yeah, and I think so that whole move right there is like, to me, is like the Trump administration backpedaling. They're kind of on their heels on that one.
Yes.
Right, because they felt pressure to have to bring him back. Right. So I think there's some backpedaling that's happening there. So the Trump administration is feeling like they're already on their heels with that, and so
excuse me,
the big beautiful bill, there's a lot of backlash that's coming from the big beautiful bill and stuff like that. So there's a lot of there are a number of things.
Is that back in the House?
It's
still in the Senate.
It's in the Senate. I think.
It's still in the Senate.
Yeah. So
they got to like the end of the month or something.
I don't remember what the time frame is.
Yeah.
So so there's some, I guess, some L's that I guess the administration is getting that they're looking for a win. And I think this is like an opportunity to kind of distract from some of those L's.
Sure, absolutely.
Right. And listen, I want to be optimistic about the administration. I'm not a huge Trump fan, but there's some things that I thought he had some good ideas on that I was like, oh, that could work. But some of this, what's happening now seems very theatrical in nature. and it seemed very political in nature and
Mhm.
not necessarily like, in line with what I was initially hoping to see from this
Yeah.
from the presidency, right? And not from his presidency, just from the presidency in general. So I want to. I'm hoping that there is. I don't know that he plays less politics and just gets to the nitty gritty of like some solution based things to get into like solving problems, because that's really all I care about. Like the politics of it all is it's frustrating because you kind of have to like dig through the politics to kind of get to like what's going on. You know what I mean? To figure out like what's happening, what's happening for real. Like this whole, I know he's doing this whole immigration thing, which I think that there are a lot of people that are for what he's talking about in concept.
Yeah, again, I go back to it's the execution
Yeah, I think
of it's. I don't think anybody. I mean, there are people who argue against the policy, but I think that the majority of people like are in agreement on the generalities of the policies.
Right.
It's the manner of execution of those policies that I think is a big. I think that's what really kind of like stokes the fire, if you will, or that's where the concerns are, and then we end up with the art. Then you end up with the debates and the discourse around the policy. You got the people arguing for policy, like I'm going to like the right. They're arguing for the policy because these are policies that actually, I think again, majority of Americans could get on.
Right.
But then you've got the left and they're fighting two different things. One's talking about policy, and the other's talking about implementation of those policies. And they're not arguing on the same thing, but they're being like measured,
right? As if
they're the same thing, and it's not. And
they're talking like across each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Meanwhile, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is dividing us.
Yeah.
Right, and having us argue about not really what the issues.
So I guess the question then, who's driving that? Is that something like who's driving that? Like what is the advantage to getting us as a nation to be divided that way? Like who benefits from that?
Personally, I think it's just career-long politicians. I think it's just people who've just been in it for so long. They've got so much interest. I feel like, and whether or not they're doing it maliciously, right? It's just that, you've got people who've been in there for 30, 40 years, 50, I don't know, I think 50 years is a little, 30, 40 years, right? And you kind of have like your hands, like you go in trying to fix the beast and then kind of finding yourself being the beast itself. Like your hands get tied through lobbyists, your hands get tied through your constituents, your hands get tied with your own personal interests. I think that there is just, to your point, the same people who are against immigration are probably the lobbyists who are lobbying against immigration, right? What did you say? The people who are lobbying against immigration are the ones who stand to lose. So they're
taking advantage of the illegals.
We call it special interest, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk special interest, you talk about other people, but there's that again is a reason why I think that and nobody talks about it because you're talking it. Well, it's not that people don't talk about it. I just don't really see.
Well, I think there's a distraction of this. Like this is the distraction.
Yes.
Right. So this is the thing that people are focused on,
and
the problem is that you have these exploitative employers that are, they're part of the lobbying system to, get illegals out as opposed to solve getting illegals to be actual like residents or get them some rights so they can pay taxes and they can live in our economy and have some basic rights to be here. Right. But they don't want that. Like it's not in their best interest to want that.
Right. So I was talking to somebody, and I'm not going to get off topic. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I haven't done any research on this, but he had made mention to me that it was like with the help of like AI and I guess I don't want to call it genealogy, but they were able to like eradicate, was it HIV or cancer cells from like a chromosome or something.
Okay.
Like to deplete, like to get. I'm gonna have to follow up with him on what that was again, but pretty much it was like a cure for cancer or for something. How
something
I read
major,
it.
right?
Something major, and we were talking about how expensive that's going. I wonder how expensive that's going to be when it comes out, and like I was like, it's going to be dictated based on. It's going to be as expensive as it needs to be to warrant not treating the disease. Right? Like that treatment to cure is not going to be cheaper than the financial benefit of
the treatment
of the disease, right? Pharmaceutical companies don't want to
They don't want to cure
They
anything.
don't want to cure anything because then
Right.
that means they can't treat it, right? Or if they're going to cure it, then they need to say, hey, if we cure it, the cost of the cure needs to be greater than the revenue stream of the treatment.
Which is not likely to be.
Which is not likely because we've got super high fucking healthcare costs.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, again, it just goes back into, I think that's the reason why, just being like, that's why I think division is the play. And I think of it like from a micro, right? So, you got microeconomics, you got macroeconomics, you got microeconomics, stuff that's happening locally. And then you got macroeconomics is really kind of like more theory and how things operate at scale.
Yeah.
Right. And so I kind of use that analogous to how I feel our political system operates. Now you probably have, and I know that you have individual, politicians, spread throughout state level, federal level, whatever, who specifically have their own interests, and they do not have a public servant's heart.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you do have those servants, and I do still think it's the majority who have a public servant's heart, who is actually doing it for the good of the people. But when you take those individual micros and then you look at it from the macro, like just the way that the environment works because of how the ecosystem has been created, it's very hard to get out of that.
Yeah.
For it being like just so much so much private interest and special interest tied up in.
Yeah. Well, that gets into like
very difficult.
Doing this, was it the necessary evils? Right.
Yeah.
That's what gets into that. Where you see politicians, you're like, they come in and when they first start, they have sort of like a certain viewpoint on how they want to do things. And then after they've been in the system for a while, they're like, now they seem to be like playing the same game that everyone else is playing. And you're like, wait, I thought you were doing like this for this honorable reason. And then now you're doing this other thing that's like, that doesn't fit what you were talking about over here. Right?
That's why I think it'd be interesting. And I feel like Europe has it's kind of set up like this, like parliamentary, like how the parliament is set up. It's like, you're not voting from my understanding, like over in Parliament, it's not like here where we vote for a candidate, right? Like it's like, well, I'm going to run and you're voting for me and I'm going to run on issues, right? From my understanding, the way that Parliament works and I guess the cohorts or whatever you like, the caucuses and stuff that they have there is like you vote on issues and like you're a representative of certain issues within like, I guess like that caucus or something. And then you actually have to work with other caucuses or other groups on different issues. And then that's how you get, like, I would love to see it. I'm gonna explain that. I would love to see it. Like if I were a politician or running, I would love it to where it's like, hey, I'm going to run and I'm representing these issues. I'm representing the issue of,
let's say, immigration.
I'm representing the issue of, and let's do another. Jobs. These are the two that I'm running on. These are the two things. And so I'm garnering support for these issues. Or I'm not garnering support. It's the caucus is garnering support for these issues. And then you've got a representative for this caucus. And then I go, but as I'm not a career long person, I'm not going to be the one who stands there because I'm not the one like making the people can vote on the issues and the representatives of those issues get votes or certain numbers. Right. And then it makes these different issues have to work together instead of pigeoning, your faith into one person. You get what
I'm not sure. I'd have to see how they operate. I mean, I thought they still had like a party system and
they do. So I'm going to talk with my friend who this was a handful of years ago.
Yeah.
We were just talking about how
I know there are certain parties, and then certain parties do represent like specific groupings of like people that believe certain issue types. But I'm pretty sure they still have they have a party system.
Yeah,
and
I think it's a 2-party system.
No, they
No,
have
it's not.
they have
They
more
have
than
a bunch actually.
Yeah, they got a multiple. Like the United States, I think, is one of the only 2-party.
So I think that's what he was talking about, is the fact that there's multiple party systems there. So it's like
they have to
work with each other. It's not like
that's the problem with the
this or
binary
that.
system that we have, is that like it's either them or it's either A or B, right?
Yeah.
And if A has more votes, then A gets it. If B has more votes, B gets it. And they don't have to work with each other.
Like
but when you have like A, B, and C at least, right?
Yes.
Then in order for this issue to happen, like you got to either work with A or you got to work with C, but B can't be on their own.
Exactly.
Right? Unless they have a majority, which is going to be difficult if all 3 parties are strong.
And I told is the same person I was having a conversation with over the weekend. He's mentioned he's not a fan of either political system. I'm like, or either political party. I'm like, I'm in agreement.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think that both parties have their problems. And he's like, we need a third party. I was like, we do. It's called the independent party.
Well, that's not a party.
It's not really a party, but like it's a movement. I was like, and you should probably call it something else.
Yeah.
Like,
well, the thing is that you can't. Being an independent is not like, by virtue of what it is not a party. It is independent of parties. So like you need to have a third like actual.
I mean, that's kind of like saying that being an atheist isn't a religion. It's like a religion. Like you are kind of a party. You're not a party as like the Republican Party is, and you're not like officially formed, but you have the views. There's just not enough. You have the viewpoints, or you're like
but independent, it doesn't have aligning viewpoints. Like independent is just like not in agreement with either of your parties, but I can be an independent and be completely further right or fascist, and I can be independent and be a complete leftist, right? So like,
well, to the point is that he thinks there needs to be a third party. I'm like,
well, there are third parties. They're just not very strong.
Very strong parties, and I'm like, I was like, but how would that help? Why do you want a third? Why? And I asked him, I was like, why would you want a third party? I was like, because we've had this conversation multiple times. You've already told me that you could not agree with a lot of the stuff because he's a Republican from the Republican Party, and you would still vote the party line. I was like, that's, in my opinion, that's the problem. Like, the problem is that
people vote
party line regardless of what's happening. It's like, so, and you can't get rid of that. It's just, it is.
You're going to have people.
You're going to have people that do that. It is what
They're
it is.
They're religious about their politics.
But I think that goes to show. I think that just speaks again on the part. It's like, I don't know how you would structure it, but I feel like the best form of structuring is voting on issues. Like you could have like, maybe you represent one issue.
But the multiple party system would do that, right? Because when you have a multiple party system, you have to vote on issues. Like you can't just be like, oh, well, whatever I believe, that's the way that we're going to go. Like you have to vote on issues and be like, okay, immigration. Well, our view on immigration is this. Your view on immigration is that. We have differing views on immigration. We're going to have to figure it out because they have their view on immigration is outrageous, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And then so you and I would have to say, okay, well, what things about immigration do we agree on that we can at least come together and make a policy on that is at least not going to be whatever their belief is.
So what are the other parties?
You got the Green Party. Yeah, you got the Libertarian Party. There's the those are the two big ones.
So I think that, so it's like, how do you position yourself like that, right? Because you've got, like, how do you enter that? Because we've got the binary party systems. We're going to take the hot topics, right? And then what time is it? 15 minutes. You have the hot topics, right? So you're either pro-life or pro-choice. You're either Second Amendment right or That's not Second Amendment right, even though I don't think that's
I don't think so. I don't think those are binary choices.
But they're not binary. They're
presented
they're
as
presented that way. So
Yeah.
like as a third party, how do you get ground? How do you get ground on that when each party always seems to be representing the opposite side of the coin?
There is no
You know what I
opposite
mean?
side of the coin if there's three sides.
That's what I'm saying, but there isn't three sides right now.
I
So
know.
like to get the traction to bring that third side when
The people
people
have
are
to-
so embedded
Yeah,
in
That's the thing.
one or the other, it's like, I think that
It requires a movement of the people.
yes.
It requires a movement of the people to bring in a third party to actually make noise.
Which is interesting because you could argue that I would argue that the MAGA movement it's kind of like its own party. Like it was
Yeah.
so far off from
Traditional
Republicans, but it just embedded itself
Yeah.
in an existing party. So I
Yeah.
feel like
It took over the
it took
Republican.
over the Republican Party. So like
Yeah.
I think that's just a showcase of just how difficult and how strong our two-party system is.
It's very strong.
That a movement of that size couldn't even break away from.
I mean, it was still based on in Republican.
I guess it was still
ideas.
idealisms and stuff.
So
would
I
argue.
mean,
Yeah.
it's not like it was like super far fetched. It just didn't follow the traditional.
Which is a lot more right. Well, I wouldn't even say that.
It would just not
follow the traditional values of
republicanism.
republicanism.
So I mean, I think that it would require like the public to be a little bit more, be willing to be a little more nuanced in their like ability to vote for a new candidate, right? That represents a party that they feel is more in line with who they are, right? And as Americans, we have a tendency, and I think people do this. We want to vote for the winner because we want to win.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it's tough for people to like, oh, well, this is a new person. This is why incumbents win all the time, right? Because you have the new person. You're like, well, is that new person really going to win? I'm going to be doing all this work for this person.
Yeah. Do we want to try something new?
Yeah. Do we want to change or stay the same, or right? And then like, so people will vote for who they think is going to win, not necessarily who they think is in the best interest of like what is going to be in their best interest, right? So that happens a lot. So
it's such a weird human psychology.
I know it's weird about that. I mean, that's a thing that we have up here.
The reptilian man.
Yeah.
Amblygotta.
Yeah. Amygdala.
Yes. So glad you knew what I'm talking about. Said that out loud. I'm like, I'm so much farther off from what the actual word was. Than I thought it was when it came out. I was like, that just sounded like a terrible word.
All right. But yeah, I think that people have a tendency to want to vote for the winner.
Mm-hmm.
And if you a third party never, when was the last time a third party won? Do you remember when the last time a third party won?
Was it I'm probably wrong.
Like the presidency?
I want to say it was, if it even was it Taft?
Like a third party.
I don't know if a third party ever won.
Yes, the Republicans. Back when Lincoln won.
Oh, when the Republican Party became the Republican Party off of the Democratic Party and the
Whigs.
The Whigs. That's what it was.
So like way back then, that's when it happened. That's the last time a third party won the presidency.
And then the Whigs just disappeared.
Then it disappeared, right? It just became a nothing party, right? So like the question
was that back in the 1800s?
Well, with Lincoln's time frame, I don't know when Lincoln was president. I don't remember when. Yeah,
it had been in the 1800s.
Yeah. So it was way back then, hundreds of years ago. It feels like, right? Like over a century ago, something like that. So long time, right? That a third party actually won the presidency. And then what happened? It wasn't like there was the Whigs, the Republicans, and the Democrats. The Whigs just disappeared and it became the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah.
Right? It became a binary system again. So even if a new party comes in, like, will it hold as a multiple party system, or will it not? I mean, ideally what you want is you want to have like 5 or 6 parties,
Yeah.
because even if one falls off, you still got multiple parties, right? And then maybe a new one comes in, and it's not unusual for.
That'd be a good case study. I wonder how Europe ended up hanging on to a multiple party system.
Well, I mean,
Okay, I don't know.
They started with a multiple. I mean, I guess we technically started with a multiple party system, but it went binary pretty fast.
What I find crazy is that I'm pretty sure maybe it was Benjamin Franklin. And was he a framer of the Constitution?
Ben Franklin?
Ben Franklin?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But he made I'm pretty sure it was him who made the comment that in some capacity, some type of message that the two-party system will be, I don't want to say the end of the government, but will be the biggest challenge. It would be super detrimental to the government, the two-party system. And I find it interesting that if that was a viewpoint, maybe it wasn't a shared viewpoint, but there wasn't something that the framers didn't forecast that out on how you could prevent a binary party system. Because I'm almost positive it was Benjamin Franklin who made that comment
About
the two-party system being detrimental or destructive to the the union.
Well, I mean, there's no way to. Well, how do you
prevent that?
That's that's hard to you force a party to exist.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
I mean, it probably isn't, which is probably why we're here now. I guess maybe just the European Union was just more. I don't want to say.
I mean, I think
open to it. I don't know. I just think it would be an interesting case study to see how they were able to form and hold on to.
Well, I think that they were able to put together a sophisticated system much later, once we had a little bit more political sophistication, right? And both from the framers of their system as well as the citizens of their system. Like the framers of our system, the citizens were coming from like a kingdom.
Yeah.
So they didn't really have any sophistication.
We only had one. Yeah. Two's better than one. Sold.
So like we didn't have our citizens didn't necessarily have an understanding of political systems in this capacity. Yeah. Like they were used to just having a king or a queen or something like that. You know what I mean? So, not to say that they didn't have the ability to have that sophistication, but it was also harder to communicate all of that across the nation. Like it's all, letters and horseback and Pony Express shit, So, when the European Union was really put together at a high level, like by that time, all the countries had been there's a communication system. We had the telephone and, stuff like that. And just the ability to communicate much faster. People were a little bit more sophisticated in their nuanced understanding of what politics were, even if it wasn't at a high level. They had a much more sophisticated view than being a rural farmer from the 1700s. You know what I mean? 1800s. So I think that helped them to be able to establish multiple party system and then keep that multiple party system in place where you have a lot of support for the different parties that were represented, because they all represented your Labor Party and you have your all the different interests, right? And then they all would be able to we can support this, right? So for our country, that sophistication didn't exist. So you only had a very small number of people who really understood what was happening. You know what I mean? And then it really kind of boiled down to who the power players are, and then they ended up kind of going into their direction, each of their respective directions, and ended up being a binary system, even though that wasn't the ideal, even though that's not the ideal scenario. Yeah. So for us, I think it would be beneficial for us to have multiple parties, because it would require our politicians to have to work with other interests in order to make laws, so that you don't have these binary laws, right? That you have to make concessions in order to make a thing happen. You can't have a super majority all the time
Mhm.
And it just keeps going back. You got a Democratic supermajority, and then you got a Republican supermajority, and then they just make laws that are just to their interests. And then, it just becomes this sort of craziness of laws that are just like all the way over here and all the way over here. And there's not any
repeal
there's not any median, okay, we're going to make this law and then we're going to make some concessions to this law because not everyone's going to agree to this. But this is the best middle ground that we can fit.
I feel like the two-party system wasn't bad, 20, 30 years ago. I feel like both parties were, they had opposing views, but I feel like there was still such a large cohort of moderates in both parties.
Yeah.
Right. To where they could, could come to some.
I think honestly,
I feel like the parties have just. Gotten so far.
I think the biggest challenge that we have right now in our political system is even if you were to say, okay, let's not do multiple party system, kept it as a two-party system. The biggest challenge I think in our political system is money.
Oh, 100%.
And the biggest challenge to that is when Obama passed the Citizens
United.
Yeah,
that says that companies that dollars are free speech.
Correct.
Pretty much,
that's what super PACs got really created, so they can now speak their That to me, I think is highly problematic. And I think that the fact that was passed is that to me seems because what's funny is that because everyone touts Obama as you hear so many things about Obama being such a great president. He was not as great. He was a wonderful oral speaker. He was
great,
fantastic. He made presentations. When he spoke, people I love to listen to him. He's just a fantastic speaker. Yeah, but he does. He's a really amazing. He's captivating.
Very captivating.
You know what I'm saying?
That cadence of his speech.
Yeah, he's just a captivating person to listen to. So he just sounds like this sage almost when he speaks, which is why I think. Even when I voted for him the first time, I was I think I was captivated by that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you look at his record, there were some really questionable things he did. Right? He threw down more bombs in Afghanistan than every other president. He ran out of bombs to drop. He literally we ran out. He dropped so many bombs using drone strikes that we ran out of munitions to drop in Afghanistan. Crazy. You'd be wait, what? Mm-hmm. Obama did that? Yeah, he totally did that. You know what I mean? And then this whole Citizens United thing, that totally sounds like something you would expect a Republican to pass.
Totally. 100%. 100%.
A Democrat pass that? What? You would expect a Republican to pass that. So that, sort of makes you think that, okay, they're kind of are they really a binary system, or is it two sides of the same coin and the rest is theater to make it look like you have illusion of choice?
Well, that's where the whole Machiavellian thing comes in, and
well, with a 3 or 4 party system, it'd be very difficult to pull that off.
Yeah,
that's much harder to do.
I mean, I think a lot of Americans would agree that they don't feel that either party is actually in control. It's the special interest.
Well, oligarchy. That's why people talk about this idea of oligarchy, where the corporate interest is the one who has the majority control of what's happening. Because if I'm going to a politician and I'm lobbying them and I'm saying, hey, listen, if you make this law, right, we're going to make sure that we'll put you on the board of directors once you retire, right? And then, as a matter of fact, here's a copy of the law that we think would be ideal for you to pass. And they'll write it for them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they'll just make
Our lawyers wrote this for you.
Yeah, for you, on your behalf.
So you didn't have to worry about the nuances, and you can do what you do best, which is talk to people.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's freaking was it Emperor Palpatine, right? And it's totally, talking to the senators.
What did she saying? This is how democracy dies in a thunderous cheer or something,
right.
Whatever that.
So it's just it's so it's definitely there's definitely there's some nefarious activity happening, and we got to figure out a way to suss that out. In the interim, my hope was, because even though I was not a fan of Trump going into the presidency, I was hoping he was going to be, because he's already rich, right? And he's already kind of like, he's got money beyond, he's a billionaire. And so I was hoping money would not be a driver for him, and that he really, my hope was that he was more interested in just like the legacy of his, because he's very prideful, and the legacy of his presidency is what he was looking for. That he would do things that were just not in line with like corporate interests. Like he was a bull in a china shop, and that he would just kind of do his own thing. And some of the things I knew I wasn't going to like, but I knew that I figured he would also do things that I would be like, okay, yeah, I can ride with that. And some of the things he talked about, I was like, yeah, I could ride with that. But when he does stuff like this, like with the whole like, National Guard and, with Governor Newsom, like it seems like it's almost personal or, political to make him look weaker or something. Like I wonder if there is like that I don't know, some of that is there, right? Some of that like invisible hand is still moving the dial, right? And he's participating in that. You know what I mean? So
I mean, I think that he's still worried about his legacy, but I think that the difference is I think that you're seeing his legacy being how he's viewed by the country, on the country legacy. And I think that his focus on his legacy is his individual brand and his family's brand, which doesn't matter how the country looks at him. If his companies are as successful as he says they are, and he's positioning his family even with overseas business and stuff, like he's not necessarily liked, and it could be arguable how much he's liked here domestically, but he's liked by a lot of other leaders, arguably questionable leaders. But he's got, I would say that I think that it doesn't really matter where he fills his cup.
I don't know. I think that he has I feel like, I mean, based on like just some of the conversations when he has interviews and stuff like that, it does sound like he does have somewhat of an interest in wanting to be seen as one of the great or even the greatest president the United States ever had. I think that's an interest of his.
I think so, but I also think that, I mean, but I still think that he still sees himself that way. Like regardless, like if nothing changed and he was right here, I think that he would see himself as arguably the best president. He's got such a large support from his supporters. And it doesn't even mean that his supporters are the majority. They're just really loud. You know what I mean? So it's like, I feel like he would or could argue that. Like, just, I don't know. I just go back. I don't try and like pin on what I think he is. I just look at I look at
what's he doing?
I look at what he's doing. I look at his character, and I hate it when I've had conversations like, well, these people do it this way, or they said they were going to do something and did it. I was like, I get it. But the fact that I just like, he does it so often. Like,
give me an example.
Just like, I feel like just like he'll say one thing, like we could talk about, like, just because we were talking about the federalizing the National Guard, right? He explicitly said that he wouldn't do that unless it was an insurrection, and then he did do that. And mind you, politicians move back and forth on a lot of stuff. But then, he talks about, and then he did the tariffs thing, and then the tariffs it wasn't going to be permanent; it was going to be temporary, and then it just like goes back and forth.
Hold on.
I wish that I could like pull out a list of individual things, and I can do some like thinking on that. It's just not in my hubris right now to like just like pull that out. But I just feel like he says one thing and then he'll do something else, or I just have this underlying. I just don't trust what he says.
I don't
like, and I can't, I feel like it's just a culmination of a lot of stuff that's happened. And like, I just don't. And I just don't feel like I can trust what he says. I don't like I don't like how he presents himself from a person of character. Like, it's just a lot of maybe more qualitative things that really just like, it's hard for me to get around. Like, people will say, yeah, but I don't like the guy, but his policies and politics. I'm like, I get it, but like, I just feel like that's just such a slippery slope, man. Like, I just like, but he says some things about about the politics or his policies, and you could argue that his tariffs are the larger plan of bringing down prices and stuff. But there hasn't been a plan for how that would. I mean, he even made the comment before. He's like, he was stringent on tariffs wouldn't raise prices. They're not going to raise prices. It's going to be the other people who are going to have to pay for it. And then he later made a comment that, the companies should eat that, should take it. So it's like, oh, so it is going to raise prices, and you're asking the companies to eat it. And even if the companies do eat it, they're going to pass it to the consumer. So it's just like, I don't know, man. It's just like a lot of smoke. Like, and I know politicians do smoke and mirrors and stuff, but I feel like it's just, and maybe just because it's where I'm at in my life right now. I'm just a little bit older. I'm in my late 30s right now, right? So I'm definitely more, not influenced, just more like aware, or just put myself more in positions of trying to be more informed about like what's going on in our people. So I definitely wasn't as involved when as I am now, as when Biden was president, as when Trump was president before, let alone when Obama was president, right? I mean, I've only been able to vote this was my 5th election that I was able to vote, and I just made the cutoff in Obama's first term. And I didn't vote in that because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So really, I've only been in 4 elections. 4 presidential elections. And, focusing on politics was not what I was focused on in my younger years. So it's hard because like I can't compare apples to apples. If I go back and I compare my views and stuff from earlier elections, I wasn't trying to stay as informed, or I wasn't just as involved, I guess you could say. So, I say that stuff with like grains of salt because like I feel like sometimes I'll say things and like I don't want it to seem like I know this stuff for sure. It's just right. It's just.
I mean, I think that's a valid concern. I mean, and I know that we got to start wrapping things up. But I guess my thought is that if I'm not as concerned because I don't really trust what politicians say in general. Yeah, I really care about like what the outcomes are. Right. So, because I know that a lot of what they say is theater.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. It's just and it may not, someone else. Right. So a lot of this tariff talk, I think, was a lot of theater for others, like for international community, right? More than it was for us. But obviously, he can't be like, hey, I'm going to tell you one thing, I'm going to tell everyone else something else, because everything he says is public. Yeah. So I do feel like there is a theatrical element that is necessary in order for him to be able to, for any president, for any politician to be able to do their job, they have to do some theater. Sure. That is the necessary part because, if you're negotiating something or whatever, you don't want to necessarily give away everything that you're trying to do. So sometimes you may not even be able to share what your plan is because your plan, if I tell you what my plan is, then everyone knows what my plan is. And then my plan won't work because I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to negotiate a deal. But if I tell you all the things I'm going to do, then everyone's going to know. Then how can I negotiate the best deal when you know exactly what my plan is, right? So I do understand that there is some theater, and sometimes politicians do have to kind of
they got to play that role.
They got to play that role. Sure. So I am more interested in seeing outcomes. So he's only been in office for
140 something days.
Yeah. So I want to kind of see like how I'm still in a wait and see because I want to see what the outcomes are. I am concerned about some of the things that he's doing, like this pulling the National Guard for this scenario. I don't think I feel like that was too fast. And I think that he's probably going to regret having done that, because my guess is that he put Governor Newsom in a position. I think he may have put Governor Newsom in a position where he can make an argument that, hey, the president didn't even give me the opportunity to manage this problem because it happened so fast. You know what I mean? Like the protest started on the 6th of June, and then the 7th of June, an incident happened, and by the 8th, the guard was there. Yeah, like it was so fast. So like I feel like, you know, he didn't give the governor enough time to be able to respond with even the National Guard. Yeah, to even be able to say, oh yeah, I'm already using the National Guard. I just made a call to. He didn't even give him the opportunity to do that. Yeah. So I think that's going to I can see a judge looking at that and being like, yeah, the president didn't even give him time to be able to handle this, to be able to call the National Guard for his own purposes under his authority, right? You just kind of unilaterally came in and fixed the problem without giving the governor the opportunity to do that himself. Yeah. And I think that if that happens, that's going to make him look bad. And then that's going to lower, you know, for the people that are on the left, they're going to be like, you see, he's bad. And then for the people on the right, they're going to be like, oh, well, maybe he did move too fast. Or maybe they'll make a case to try to defend him. But the people in the middle are going to be like, oh, well, maybe he's being too much shooting from the hip. Yeah. Right, president, as opposed to being more a little bit of abuse of powers or overstepping. Whatever they say, right? I mean, you can say it's abuse of power, that which people on the left will probably say. People on the right might just say, well, he shoots from the hip, so sometimes he just moves faster than he needs to, right? And then the people in the middle have to determine, well, which one is it, and do I want either one of those? Yeah. Right? Do I want
shoots from the hip a lot?
Yeah. Do I want a president who shoots from the hip and is not conscientious of like
the repercussions?
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Fallout.
So, I think that's going to put him in that could potentially put him in a bad position. So I think, I mean, he's a president, so you know, short of him, you know, essentially being ousted from his role, he's going to be president for the next 3 years.
3 years.
So there's not really much that can be done, but for the purposes of allowing him, giving him support to be able to do some of the other things that he's claimed that he wants to do, will he be able to get that? Well, the more resistance he gets from the population, the easier it's going to be for Democrats to be able to fight him on things. Because if he gets support from both Republicans and Democrats, then Democrats are pressured because they're getting their support coming from their side to also do the thing. Like let's say I'm a Democrat and I represent a constituency, and my constituency, it tends to be Democrat, right? And the Republicans that are in my district are voting, let's say, for whatever Trump wants. But then I have a division in the Democratic side where Democrats are voting for the Democrat policies, but there's some Democrats that are kind of like, well, I kind of like what he's doing. That makes it harder for me to be like, I'm going to just do whatever do party line stuff, right? Because now I have pressure in my constituency that says, hey, the Democratic Party representation in my district is split. So I think I'm going to have to be a little bit more moderate here.
Yeah, until we can gerrymander these lines.
Whole other conversation.
But yes,
you see what I'm saying?
See what you're saying. Yeah.
So, but the more that happens, and now, you know, if you have those moderates that are still registered as Democrats, for example, saying, oh, well, I don't want someone who shoots from the hip. I don't want that. Now there's no pressure for me to have to vote for whatever, you know, he's wanting to be on the ticket or whatever the case, the bill or whatever, right? Because now my constituents are all unified in going against whatever that is. Right. So I think that he's going to run into challenges if he keeps doing stuff like that, because, you know, what benefits him is when there's pressure from the left to do things that he's proposing. You know what I mean? When the population that is like Democrat, but they're kind of moderate Democrats, but he's saying something that moderate Democrats could jump on it and be like, oh, I can agree with that, right? Then it's going to be hard for Democrats to do party line shit.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think the more he does that, the more he wears against that, the less he's going to be able to accomplish, assuming he wants to accomplish, more things in his presidency. So, so I think that's going to be problematic for him over time. So I guess we'll see how that plays out.
Time will tell.
Yeah. So I mean, I was hopeful that he would be more of the bull in the China store than kind of playing politics the way he's doing right now. So I'm not excited about kind of what I'm seeing right now. But I mean, it goes back and forth, and we'll see how this kind of plays out. Hopefully, he can get back to just kind of trying to work on getting some things done. I mean, I'm not excited that he used the executive orders the way he did. I don't like executive orders being used in that capacity. But to his defense,
I'm okay with presidents using executive orders to put things in place within their power, so long as it is followed up with efforts to legislate.
I would agree with that.
On those, right? Because that's kind of like,
it's a temporary law.
It's a temporary thing. It's like, I think that this is going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's within the power for me to draft an executive order, and we're going to put it in place, and we're going to roll it out, and we're going to see what it is. How it plays out. And then the goal is to legislate that.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? But I think I'm okay with that. Just to draft executive orders, like how he's doing. And other presidents have done too.
And again, some of them I've agreed with, and some of them I'm like, that's a little bit, that's pushing it. But I mean, I think he's pushing the boundaries of what he can do, and that's part of the bull in the China shop, right? To me, that's kind of what the bull. So I don't mind that so much. I don't like necessarily the use of executive orders like that, but I think if the goal is to, hey, we want to test this so we can legislate it later, I think that's fine. We've not really seen that in practice.
No.
So
right. It's just kind of like, if they agree, they just keep the executive order standing.
Right.
Which is, and it's like they don't learn from that, because that's ended up what happened with with the Democrats when they were so up on heels with Roe versus Wade getting overturned. And it's like, well, you guys just didn't feel the need to legislate that. You should have legislated that.
I thought that wasn't an executive order.
No. I'm just talking about, it wasn't an executive order, but it was legal precedent.
Oh, I see.
That gave that right. It wasn't.
Like a law.
It wasn't, legislated. It wasn't codified into law.
I see what you're saying.
So that was their fault. That was their problem. They had the control even during the Clinton,
a bunch of different
times. If that was an issue, they should have codified that into law when they had the opportunity, and then they didn't. And now they're trying to run this is just, it's like, well, you guys fucked up, man.
Yeah.
You should have done what you should have done.
Right. And now the Republicans codified their version into law, and now it's done.
We can have your cake and eat it too, man.
Right.
So anyways, that's, we're not getting on abortion.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Different conversation to have. So anyways, that's kind of my viewpoint on it. I think this whole immigration conversation that's happening right now is it's kind of crazy town right now. So we'll see how that plays out. I do think that this is going to be problematic for the administration over time. I feel like it's going to be problematic over time. I feel like that Governor Newsom probably has a good enough justification to argue that at the very least, the president didn't give him enough time to use his resources to be able to address what's going on here. And I think on that alone, I would unless he gets in front of a very, very, very conservative judge, but even still a reasonable person.
I still think that if they could put their politics aside.
Yeah, I think a reasonable person would say, well, you
just didn't
give him enough time.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think a reasonable person, a reasonable judge would say, yeah, you didn't give the governor. I hate that.
What's a reasonable amount of time? Not 2 days.
Yeah. Not even 2 days.
It wasn't even because it happened on the 7th.
So the 6th is when the protest happened. The incident happened on the 7th, and by the 8th they were there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's not even a 24, a day. You didn't give them a day.
Yeah.
Come on, give them a couple days.
Yeah.
Let some shit burn down before you call the National Guard. You know what I mean? So I think that is going to. I think that I would be surprised if Governor Newsom is not able to get his perspective heard, and for a judge to say, "Yep, I agree with you. You didn't have enough time." Right? I don't think that they'll call it illegal. I think if because right now he's trying to. I think one of the things that he's trying to do is trying to say that what President Trump did is illegal. I think that's a bad call on Governor Newsom. I don't think he should go that route. But I think that if he makes the case that he wasn't given sufficient time to be able to manage that on his own for his own state, I think that's the direction he should go with. And then maybe if he wants to pursue legalities of it, do that later.
Yeah, I think illegal might not be
I wouldn't go legal.
word.
Yeah, because if he loses the legal argument, he won't get anything.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If they say, "Oh nope, he was well within his legal right to do that," then if you try to make a case afterwards for like, "Oh, but I didn't have time," well,
I think a better word would have been like outside of his authority. But even then, it just shouldn't have happened. We'll see.
I think time is really the thing that he should make a case on. I wasn't given sufficient time to be able to use the resources I have available to me, because a day is not enough time. Like I don't think that was enough time. So I think that's the best argument that I think Governor Newsom has against like Trump using the.
I think he's going to use the illegal. And this is the last thought I'll give. I think that the term, him saying that it was illegal, I think is going to be stemming from the fact one of those rules that if local enforcement cannot contain a situation, then that's when the president has the authority to federalize or nationalize the.
But that's not what the president is going to be arguing. The president's going to be arguing that federal agents and federal buildings were at risk of. So federal agents were already hurt, and federal buildings were at risk of being damaged. So the National Guard was federalized to protect the federal agents and the federal buildings.
Yeah, but I thought that there was three reasons. I'm going to look it up, but I thought that there was three ways in which it had to fall within these three things in order for it to be
the federal buildings
federalized.
The federal buildings being at risk is one of them. So ICE agents are federal, and then
in the federal building.
Right, in the federal buildings. So those two things are going to be the case. Now, it's a weak argument.
Yeah.
So, but it gray area fits, right? So we'll see how that plays out. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Maybe we'll hear something over the next month or so, and we'll, I guess, address it at that time. So anyways, that's been our conversation today. We're just talking about what's going on in Cali. So I appreciate you guys watching. If you like what you're hearing, please comment, please share. If there's anything you want us to chat about, please leave in the comments below. We're happy to, talk about those things. We'll learn about them as best we can, and just kind of have conversations about, casual conversations, I guess you could say, about these topics to the best of our knowledge. And if there's anything that we're saying that's not accurate, please let us know. We're not claiming to be super experts about this stuff. We're just kind of looking up information as best as we can, just like every other American in the United States, and trying to just figure out what's going on, like what's happening, and trying to have like reasonable conversations, and not trying to put a political spin on anything. We're just trying to get what's going on and how should we be thinking about these things. So anyways, appreciate you guys watching. My name's Gus.
I'm Chris.
And this is the Anomaly Podcast. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
So these are the three key reasons.